We've given you 5 minutes grace. Es lo que toca en Spain.
This is typical here in Spain. I'm going to talk in Spanglish, more or less, so that I can really take care of all of you. And
do we have in the hall right now? España, Euskadi, Cataluña, Andalucía, Mallorca, todas las zonas, 15 comunidades, estos son todos los...
She's quoting all the Spanish languages and provinces. Por lo tanto,
foreigners. How many foreigners do we have in the room? Welcome to all of you. Really, we're all in the same boat. It's not a matter of being Spanish or foreign. We share the same destiny, don't we? All of us. And we would like to think that this is going to be a very constructive, collaborative future that we're looking at as one planetary family that's trying to change things for the better. So, ladies and gentlemen, estos que están ahí fuera,
those of you who are outside, far away, who seem to be in Mars, why don't you come here, please?
Ay, qué pereza, ¿veis?
Oh God, it is so boring, isn't it? I feel so lazy. Creativity cannot make us feel lazy, so come on immediately. We have to be the very first one to set the example for the rest. And the changes really take an effort. It is useless to say that we want to change, and we are the very first to have resistance, to oppose resistance. Thank you so much. Okay, be very welcome to this session.
Q&A with Edward. Before we start, I wanted to contextualize the moment. I would like to introduce myself to those who don't know me. Me llamo Donna Pace.
My name is Donna Pace.
Like Edward. And one thing I would like to share with all of you is that Edward de Bono came into my life when I was a teenager. I was still very young. I'm still very young, obviously, but I was younger then. And when his books came into my life, it changed me forever. It impacted the way I thought. It impacted the way I could operate. Edward has taught me to go beyond numeracy and literacy. He has taught me operacy. And operacy is something that we are still not learning, and we are definitely not teaching in a way which is systematic and rigorous. So Edward is in my DNA. It is in my bloodstream. It is not a book I read and I forget. The impact has been for life. A lo largo de esos últimos
Along these last 10 years, I have had the great honor of leading what is the training, the rigorous and systematic, the Bono training in Spain and other countries. And I would like to share with you here the pleasure to share this room with some colleagues, with some mates of journey. I would like to introduce, first of all, the trainers, the trainers with a degree of Bono in Spain.
Edward de Bono, can you stand up, please, so they can see you? Thank you. If you have any questions for them, thank you. If you have any questions for them, perhaps you'll see them outside. You know, these are the people you need to be stopping, because I think we're missing a lot of resources. There's so much intellectual capital amongst us all here. We may not know who's who, and it's a pity that we're not making the most of the moment, because today is our last day. I would also like to introduce a group of people who have made Edward's work a modus operandi in their organization. And they come from a public hospital here in the Basque Country. They are our chapelurdines, they are our blue hats, and they are the ones who manage thinking sessions in their organization because they have been properly trained in Edward's tools. Ladies and gentlemen, please. Elisa. Okay. So, I wanted to start this session getting you to think about something. This is what we do, we get you to think. We are in the year 2015. Estamos en el año 2015.
We are in the year 2015, and for me, I am certain, I'm absolutely positive, because of all the things that I'm reading, I'm researching, that this is just the beginning of a movement of time in an exponential way.
Time which is exponential. It is not linear anymore. We are moving from 2 to 10 to 25 to 5,000 to 5 million. We know that the changes that are coming are going to be so absolutely mind-blasting that we're not going to know what hit us. If
we keep on thinking with a linear mentality, we won't be able to row with this exponential change, along with the exponential change that is going to catch us with the trousers down there, as people say in Spain.
We're in a cycle between 2015 to 2030, which is going to be extremely relevant for all the changes that we think we are going to face. And I would like to give you just 1 minute to think of something. As you can see, Edward had a prediction many years ago. That's an old quote. I would like you to think about your own prediction. Where or what do you think is going to be different in 15, in 30, in 50, in 100 years' time? I'd like you to take a minute to think, because if we don't think, we don't move. Can I ask for silence for you to think about your own predictions? And if you can write it down, write it down. ¿Habéis venido sin bloque de notas y bolis? Pues
Have you come here without your writing pad and no pen? Very badly done. You are going to fail. You have 1 minute to think of predictions, of a forecast for the future. Sorry not...
To think of it. I'm just giving you free ground to be able to think and to imagine what you think the future is going to look like in 15, 30 years' time. What would be your own prediction? In terms of technology, in terms of society, in terms of politics, in terms of education. So I'm giving you a free field, but you can come in from whenever you like. Vale?
Okay.
There's too much noise. You can't be thinking. Okay, stop. Sabemos que para sacar cualquier...
We know that in order to make the most of the mind and our intellectual faculties, we have to stop to focus on that, because otherwise everything is running much too much. And the Bono method deals with this, to stop to think.
This was written in 1987, Edward. As electronic technology becomes more accessible, the phrase information overload is going to become even more fashionable. 1987. 1987, nobody understood what information overload was. Edward de Bono has always been a visionary. He's always been a man who lived before his times. He is the quintessential Renaissance man.
What's that?
You're the quintessential Renaissance man. Somebody who has only brought renovation and novelty in many ways. I foresee two new professions emerging: an information broker, collector, sorter, explorer, synthesizer, reviewer, and information designer. Design information so that it can be self-organizing and understood at a glance. A third prediction. I envisage higher order languages designed to be easy to learn, cutting across existing language barriers. These are some of Edward's quotes taken from the book New Letters to Thinkers. Para contextualizar,
In order to contextualize this, I am going to throw from some threads of three books, probably you don't know, because they are not really in the mainstreams.
with your permission, is a book called Letters to Thinkers. I recommend highly for those of you who enjoy reading in English. Another one called I Am Right, You Are Wrong, that has to do with water logic and rock logic. And New Thinking for the New Millennium. These books were written a long time ago, but they were already envisaging what's happening and what's going to happen. So now we have an idea in terms of predictions, what I was looking for. I wanted to start this discussion with a phrase of Edward's, thank you, with a phrase of Edward's, which is one of our favorite in our De Bono world, which is the quality of your thinking will determine the quality of your future. La calidad de su pensamiento
The quality of your thinking will determine the quality of your future, paraphrasing that in Spanish again. And I would like to know if around this question, around this sentence, this quotation, if you have got any kind of question for Edward or remark for Edward, because you are playing the main role. And that's why, for those of you who want to post them, the questions, we have got Mike. And we are going to create some movement. For those of you who are too far away, it would be good that you would stand up and you would get closer so that Edward can see you, because you are just faces in the distance. You think, is that okay? If you got a question and you feel like being seen by him, please go to him. He's very open, very approachable for all the people who approach him.
The quality of your thinking will determine the quality of your future. Does anybody have any kind of question they may want to put to Edward? Okay. Pues,
Who has heard to talk about green? What does green mean?
The grin is una mueca, translate.
Grim is a kind of smile. So,
Grin. It's an acronym for genetics, robotics, information technology, and nanotechnology. And there's a lot of discussion in the scientific circles about this. How is our world going to change? How are robotics going to somehow become part of the fusion between the human being and the machine? For those of you who have read Ray Kurzweil or who have read books having to do with futurology, we know that in 2045 la previsión es...
In 2041, the prevision or the forecast, the prediction is the time of uniqueness, of singularity. And?
Information technology is moving fast, and we are not moving fast enough. So this is where Edward's work is so relevant. Edward, with regards to the oncoming revolution of technology and the capacity of the human brain to adapt if it is properly disciplined and trained, what advice would you give schools, companies, and governments to be able to make it to the race? Because we're not there yet.
Well, to governments, I would say to the education department that they need to teach thinking in every school. Interestingly, recently, China has become very interested in doing that, and the University of Beijing has been doing research for 9 years on my work in schools in China. So China could become the first really thinking country. And
then you say, if China becomes the first thinking country, the rest of us can leave the planet because they're going to take over.
Probably. The other thing that I think will happen with information is we will move towards classifying information very tightly. We will say this is a fact, this is an opinion, this is something else. And whenever you see information, there will be a very clear definition of what sort of information it is.
Because in your daily lives, how many of you separate fact from fiction? I'd like to see some hands, porque los chapelurdines, eso sí.
Because the champions is something that we have to do. We know what the difference between facts and speculation is.
Quite disciplined to separate fact from fiction. And how do you do that? How do you do that? What's the system? What's the process? Critical thinking, which means you're questioning the validity of the information.
Challenging assumptions, looking for implications and consequences.
Are you in the education field? Is that your context? Where do you come from?
I come from Australia, and
Australia.
I work with adults to teach thinking skills.
Oh, right. Okay. So you have the discipline. You have the discipline. Who else? I had some hands here. Kim Mas uses... yes. How do you do it? How do you separate fact from fiction?
Good afternoon. I think it's not possible anymore. I think that fiction and reality are very much together, are mixed, and economic groups are so influential on the mass media that it's very, very different to differentiate, to make out both.
From fiction.
Well, there may be a body, perhaps a government body, which will accept something. This has passed the threshold of being fact. And you can say that and put across it information. And if you don't put it across, it means it's not fact.
So what Edward is always suggesting is that we create some kind of filters to be able to understand things in a way which is clear to everyone in the same way. Because, as you may have heard this morning when Edward was talking with David Perkins, as we know, one of the reasons why we misinterpret information per se is also because we make many errors of perception.
Yes. If 20,000 people believe something is a fact, and it's not, the fact is that 20,000 people believe it, but itself it's not a fact.
So do we understand, with this information overload that he was predicting in 1987, just how absolutely urgent and important it is to have the discipline? And that is, I think, one of the first steps in creative thinking, is to have a disciplined mind. Because creative thinking is all well and good when you're diverging, but you also need to converge. And that white hat thinking in 6 thinking hats is one of the most powerful tools I know to be able to clarify and separate fact from fiction, and to have the ability to make all the right questions to get to the right answers. So there is a system, there is a methodology that I would encourage you to try to use. With regards to information overload, do you have any questions for Edward? I have a question for Edward.
No.
You, for me, have synthesized in such a simple and, as usual, to the bone way, what the 3 major areas of weakness are in human thinking. The 3 major areas, which are the ones we always mention in class, are, one of them is complacency, as you mentioned this morning. Complacency.
Yes.
Complacency is is the lack of effort.
Yes, we accept, we believe something.
We believe something to be the way it is, and we don't make the effort to question it or challenge it.
Yes, yes.
Another of your favorites is we need creative thinking because the world in general moves in a modus operandi which you call poor thinking. What do you mean by poor thinking?
I don't know. But see, one of the important points is normally we say if there's no problem, something doesn't need thinking about. But creativity means if you look at something which is not a problem at all, but you can make a big improvement. So it's not just problem solving. Often we don't think about something unless it's a problem, and that's a weakness.
And I also think that probably poor thinking, Edward, could be the fact that people, on the whole, allow themselves to be carried away, perhaps at times, by their own arguments, dialectics, and emotional reactions,
yes,
instead of having a 360-degree kind of system which allows them to scan everything before they actually move forward and take a decision.
You see, this was always the big problem with argument. Argument was started by the Greeks to explore a subject. It doesn't explore a subject, it just explores an ego or many egos. Because we know in the brain that if there is a certain emotion, this sensitizes those parts of the brain concerned with that emotion, and only those parts. So in argument, the emotion is negative and destructive, trying to prove the other person wrong. So only those parts of the brain are stimulated, negative and destructive, nothing creative, nothing constructive. So argument is a very poor way of exploring a subject. Now, interestingly, in the United States, one of my trainers started teaching 6 hats to juries in law courts, teaching them to use the 6 hats. The result was they reached unanimous decisions very quickly. And the judges were so impressed that they put it into other states as well. I don't know now how many states it's possible to use 6 hats for the jury discussions instead of argument.
So, resuming, I think we're saying that you have identified very clearly, as a doctor and as the diagnostician that you usually are, that complacency is one of our limitations. It's a serious limitation. We need to have the attitude of saying, I need to push myself one step further. 3 minutes is not enough, I need to do 5 minutes. This effort is okay, it's an ebne, but I need to go a little bit further. And this is part of the rigor of this DNA. Complacency is something that we can become very comfortable in. Poor thinking, because of argument, because of emotional reaction.
Yes.
And another one is obviously the errors of perception. And why are the errors of perception so dangerous, Edward?
What?
Why are the errors of perception so dangerous?
They're not dangerous, but research at Harvard way back in the 1970s showed that 90% of the errors in thinking are errors of perception, and errors of logic are very tiny. But we do nothing about teaching perception. We think it's all a matter of logic. It's not. Logic is actually a very small part of thinking.
So if 90% of our errors are errors of perception, just stop to think about that for a second. 90% is ginormous. Es enorme.
This is huge. And what are we doing in order to reduce these mistakes of perception, these errors of perception?
Books include tools and techniques to be able to reduce errors of perception.
Or to broaden perception.
Or to
broaden it, or to think of alternative perceptions.
So that is where many of the power of perception tools come in, like FIP, like consequence and sequel.
Yes, the problem was, as I mentioned this morning in my talk, that in the Middle Ages the church ran schools, universities and thinking, and they were interested in the truth. And so they were very interested in logic, finding the truth and so on, which is excellent, nothing wrong with it, but it's by no means enough. There was no attention to perception, no attention to creativity, no attention to value generation, There are many huge areas of thinking which we have totally neglected because in the Middle Ages such areas were not of prime importance to the Church. The area of truth and logic was, so we developed that very well. But other areas we just didn't touch at all.
So we're saying that these are three main reasons why we need a new kind of mental software to be able to deal with complacency, poor thinking, errors of perception, and 2,400 years of thinking along the lines of the GG3.
Yes.
Does everybody know who the GG3 are? Are you familiar with the GG3? Todos? A ver,
Are you familiar with the GG3? How many of you?
the Greek gang of three. Who are they, Edward? The Greek gang of three?
What?
Who are the Greek gang of three? The GG3?
Aristotle, Plato,
And Socrates.
And Socrates, yes.
And our mental system in the West, at least, is based on the search for truth, and that's obviously our friend Plato, on the dialectic form and the argumentative form, which is Socratic, and the logical system, which we inherited from good old Aristotle. We're not saying that there's anything wrong with them. It's excellent, but it's not enough. Not today.
It's
excellent, but not enough.
It's very limited.
Today it's an ebne. We are not in any way recommending that they are criticized. It's not the attitude. But it is something that needs to be improved on. Now, Edward, there's something which I think may be of interest to them. It's definitely of great interest to me. Is you often mention the intelligence trap, or what I call the arrogance of intelligence. And that comes from, I've brought it out from your book, I Am Right and You Are Wrong. What are the limitations of the arrogance of intelligence?
Well, in a person who is intelligent, who knows that he or she is intelligent, if they reach a conclusion for which they can show a logical structure, believe that's absolutely right. But it could be that the perceptions on which they're starting are very personal, very limited. So no matter how good your logic is, if your perceptions are limited, the answer will also be limited.
And I think something else that you often mention is that the arrogance of intelligence is that when somebody wants to stick to their own truth without wanting to explore the truths coming in from other sides, it limits that person's capacity to move forward. Do we have any questions so far? We need a microphone. ¿Dónde está?
The microphone. The young man, thank you. Here.
Hello.
Hi.
It's not a question directly related to what we've been speaking about,
Yes.
but I'm interested in issues to do with health and healthcare, and I'm very
Happy
pleased
to
to
see
see there are
such
people
a-
here, so I'll
yes.
speak to them afterwards.
Yes.
But these problems to do with health and healthcare are extremely complex. For example, an issue like obesity, which in the UK is a big problem for us, and issues like very high demand for healthcare, where new treatments that are expensive are coming out, but there isn't a resource to pay for those. And I'm wondering what thinking tools are there, what ways are there to try and help us deal with these problems so that we can
Repeat
move
that.
forward?
Yes, of course. The lady comes from a healthcare context.
Yeah, I work in a university in the Faculty of Health.
She works at the university in the Faculty of Health.
Of what?
And the Faculty of Health at university
Health.
and the UK.
Yes.
And her question is, how can thinking skills help in issues within the context of health, like, for example, to solve obesity, or to help when new drugs are coming out and the resources, the economic resources, are very limited. So how can thinking help solve those kind of problems?
Well, let's look at a figure for the moment. In the United States, there are 30,000 motor accidents a year. There are 30,000 people killed by gunfire. Of these 30,000, 20,000 are suicides. Suicides. So suicides are 2/3 as bad as motor accidents and gunfire in the United States. So some help in people thinking about themselves, thinking about the world, could possibly reduce suicides.
Mm-hmm. And how can thinking skills help us to resolve problems like obesity and problems like having more resources to be able to buy drugs?
Yes. Yes.
Well, basically, obviously, with any kind of problem, as the hospital group will tell you, because they have carried out, they rigorously carry out workshops to deal with problems, opportunities, strategic plans, and they get together, they get a whole group of people together, and they go from A to B using systematic techniques. So when there is a problem, they deal with it in a way which is engineering. So it's a matter of looking for the information, seeing where the opportunities are, looking for the risks, generating ideas to come up for solutions, and then seeing how they can be implemented. So it's a question of using a structured process, because no problem is unsolvable until you start trying to solve it. Any problem can be taken on as long as you have a willingness to explore, to look for solutions. The problem becomes when people are locked into two different thinking modes and they can't get onto the same page to move forward. So once everybody's on the same page, then together you're able to explore possibilities that you would never have imagined if it weren't because you are all on the same frequency and you're able to explore things together. As they will tell you, if you have the opportunity to speak with them afterwards. They carried out 32 workshops last year, and each of those had a result. But it's because they had the input of all these people.
Changing perception. For instance, if you feel that the people around you don't appreciate you, you can feel that you are worthless. On the other hand, if you think the people around you are not intelligent enough to appreciate you, then you don't feel worthless.
So it's a change of perception. And what happens is that sometimes a problem can actually be an opportunity. And I think obesity, one of the things that really worries me a bit about obesity, and I think it's even more serious than physical obesity, it's mental obesity. I'm worried about brain obesity. I'm worried about the fact that many, and too many, are overweight mentally, and they don't have space to move forward because they need a totally new mental diet. And this is the DNA which I think we should be downloading and upgrading too. ¿Sí? Y si queréis aproximar...
If you want to come closer, why don't you come closer?
Come up next to you so you can see them.
Yo no soy muy guapo, mejor que me vea.
I'm not very good looking. I prefer. Well, in this conference, we have been, I think that the focus is too much the Commonwealth. But, well, I would like to ask you about the errors of perception. Part or some of these errors of perception, aren't they linked to news agencies? News agencies are the ones which are putting on the table what we have to think when you are talking about the media, right? Mass media. You see, I am putting on my white hat.
Whether the errors of perception, yes. Are they due to the fact that perhaps the media is misinforming us?
Yes, I think that's one of the factors, certainly is.
Yes, that could definitely be one of the factors. And that is precisely why we need to have criteria and critical thinking to be able to question that information. Where has it come from? Who said it? When did they say it? Why did they say it? What is the context?
The important difference between perception and judgment is definite. Judgment says, this is so. This is a motor car. This is a potato. Perception, you have to think of alternatives. It could be so. It seems so. It could be something else. Now, with perception, you have to have a lot of alternatives and flexibility. Otherwise, you get trapped in an inappropriate perception.
Mm-hmm. This is the young lady who is concerned about your health this morning. Okay, we'll be with you in a second. Estaba esta señorita también. ¿Sí?
Pues Bonitos calcetines.
I love your socks.
I'll tell you why I wear these socks.
Te va a contar por qué.
Esa es la pregunta.
They're a test for young ladies. If a young lady is shy and well brought up, she looks down at the socks and notices the socks. If she looks me straight in the eye to figure out how much money I have, she doesn't notice the socks. So they're a test for young ladies.
Thank you.
The next question. Gracias por esta pregunta.
Thanks for that question. Sorry, I can't speak English. I'm not fluent. And also, I'm feeling a little bit nervous and stressed. Come on, come on. Well, if you want to come closer, you can come closer. Sure, please, come here.
Y me encantaría
Gracias.
saber cómo os llamáis. I would love to. So this is
Lola.
Maria Lola. This is Lola. That's a nice Spanish name, Lola. Yes, tell us, Lola. Cuéntanos.
Pues a ver,
Well, since I arrived here, you know, thinking strategies have been there around for a long time. You have been traveling around all over the world for the last 30 years, and I have a doubt, or I'm even anguished. I'm very stressed, yes, even if I don't want to make anybody afraid, but yes, come closer, please, because I can't see you, but Mr. De Bono cannot see you. Pretty, right? She's pretty. Well, yes, I consider myself very pretty. Okay, so here comes my concern. It is a concern, yes, because we have been hearing about, you know, thinking and pedagogic different methods. What are we doing wrong if we have been talking about this for the last 30 years? In the year 2015, people in green pins in the UNICEF, if we listen to them, they are not saying the same thing as what we are saying. Because apparently with these strategies, with these fantastic leaders, the world should be better. But the sensation that people out there have, and it is true that the situation is difficult, is that things are not as bright as that. So what are we doing wrong, or what is going on? Because it is true that we don't live in a better world right now. That is pure reality right now. We are damaging the planet, our planet Earth. We have the ISIS, Islamic State, you know, which is there with all that power. We have Russia. We don't know what is going to be happening with their military deployment. So we have been talking about this for 30 years. Well, I am much younger. But what are we doing wrong? And I wonder, do we have time to react and to do something? I don't know, because whenever I go to a meeting, to a conference, I go and listen to somebody who has invented something, and they say, well, if you implement this, this is going to change everything, and somebody else will be saying the same thing. But then I listen to people in the world elite, you know, when they talk about the environment or ecology, and they say, okay, I think that we need to summarize a little bit. And they say, you know, things that are completely different. So I wonder, do we have time to wait, and do we have time to react? Oh, yes, this is interesting too. Yes.
I know that. Say yes, please. Thank you, Lola. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Ustedes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Aquí está. So Lola's question for the non-Spanish speakers basically is, if we've been at this for so many years, for so many years, and since the world out there seems to be sinking in many aspects, for example, politics, fundamentalists, terrorism, the ecology, what is it that we're still doing so wrong, notwithstanding that we've been at this for so many years? and her passion carried her away. Thank you. Edward.
What is that question?
The question. The question is, if we've been at creative thinking and trying to teach creative thinking for so many years, and there are so many bright people here today saying how important this is, why is it that we're not there yet?
Because we haven't really tried to teach creative thinking. We have tried to encourage creativity. We've tried to encourage people to show signs of creativity, but we've never tried to teach creative thinking, as a skill. Now, there's different sorts of creativity. Creative thinking is not the same as creative painting or so on. That's quite different. But creative thinking as such, one can develop certain skills, yes. For instance, one time in South Africa, there was a business meeting, and they wanted to generate ideas. Using just one of the techniques of lateral thinking, they generated 22,000 ideas in one afternoon. Now, that's powerful stuff. So creative thinking the principles can be taught. It doesn't mean everyone's going to be equally good, no. But we can teach it and use it, definitely. It's not just a matter of saying, by nature you are creative, therefore creativity is only for you. No.
It's, as I said, numeracy, literacy, and operacy should be obligatory.
Interestingly also, there's one profession which has shown the most interest in my work, which is architecture. Many of the world's most famous architects are fans of mine. Renzo Piano, Frank Gehry, Richard Norman, all these people. Because in architecture you have to show practicality and creativity.
And design thinking.
Yeah.
Can he have the microphone, please? Sonido, a ver? Okay?
Okay, so we have many wars in our world. What would you suggest to politicians and decision makers to change their thinking, to stop?
Say again?
So there are many wars in the world,
Yes.
conflict, armed conflict. What would you suggest to politicians and decision makers to change that?
Well, there are many wars because people on one side first, the other, see some advantage in having a war. Now, they are convinced that their thinking is good. Having a war will give them an advantage, give them benefits, and so on. So perhaps you need a separate body, maybe some special body of the United Nations, which would say the thinking involved in this conflict is this, and this, to spell out what the thinking is.
To have a kind of task force who are only concerned with solving and suggesting improvements and solving problems.
To have a judgment of the thinking, an independent judgment of the thinking.
Mm-hmm. Questions? Questions?
Thank you. This morning I asked what we should stop doing in schools. There's some thought about we should get rid of timetables altogether. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to know Edward's thinking about how we could organise schools for a new world without timetables.
That's a lovely question. The lady this morning asked you a question with David, and she's concerned about schools.
About?
She's concerned about schools.
Yes.
And her question is, how... There's some talk about removing timetables from schools. How would removing timetables perhaps improve performance in schools? What are your thoughts on that?
I would not particularly be in favor of removing timetables until I heard the arguments in favor of doing it. So I would not be in favor of moving timetables. I would like to have somewhere on the timetable once a week, 1 hour on thinking.
Yes, wouldn't that be wonderful if we could have 1 hour a week on thinking?
You see, there are a lot of prejudices. Mm-hmm. For instance, as you know, in England there are a lot of blonde jokes. The reason being, when in England society was very structured by levels, and if there was a beautiful blonde at the bottom level and married a man at the top level, then all the brunettes were very jealous and made jokes about her background and everything else. That's how the blonde jokes started in England. But other countries which have a lot of blondes, like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, don't have blonde jokes.
In fact, Edward, we had that experience in Malta where thinking skills were obligatory once a week in all schools. Why? Because we had a Minister of Education who was a spearhead for that change. And he made it obligatory in all primary schools and secondary public schools to make thinking part of the curriculum. And that went on for a number of years until the governments changed. So there was no continuity. And this is what tends to happen. So you were saying this morning, Edward, that perhaps we should be electing governments for more than 5 years, perhaps, depending on their performance. That may be an idea. Because I think we're all concerned about the political environment.
I would like to hear how he thinks about a country in which all schools don't teach thinking, and the government, teachers, everyone don't know about thinking. What would be now students do not think. What would he say about the future of this country? And if he has an opportunity to talk to the politicians or the Prime Minister or the Minister of Education, what would be
his argument?
Yes, the thing that he would...
What's that?
So she says, picture a country where there's no teaching of thinking in schools and where the politicians don't really understand anything about the importance of thinking. What would you be prepared to say to the politicians or to the ministers of education in terms of changing that for them? Because in her experience, nobody thinks. The children don't think, in education they don't think, and in politics they don't think.
There is some evidence, particularly from Australia, that teaching thinking improves the performance in every other subject, that the grades in every subject improve if you teach thinking. Now that's very powerful in education, if you can increase the grades in everything. So that's worthwhile teaching thinking, even if it's only for that reason.
So that's one of the major reasons.
What's the implication that he predicts we could see if they don't teach thinking?
What do you predict will happen if there's no teaching of thinking long term?
Well, we'll continue with our existing progress with all the difficulties in it and no big leap forward. Essentially that.
We keep going round in circles, basically. This is what's going to happen. We're going to keep going round in circles. So I think we need to decide what ship we want to sail in. Are we going to go in that ship or the ship that's sailing into the horizon? These are the kind of decisions we may need to make.
There's a fellow right back there.
Question? Question? Tengo dos. Dos. ¿Quién?
We have two. Who goes first?
Thank you. Edward, in all the time that I've heard you speaking about your approach to thinking, it's always been very positive, and it comes across to me as though it's the solution to all the world's problems. I'm just wondering whether you have a view on any limitations to lateral thinking. What are the limitations? What's perhaps imperfect about it? I'd be interested to know your thoughts about that.
No. Do you understand his question? The gentleman is asking, he says that as long as he's heard you speak in the past, and your talks are always very positive in terms of the need and the use of creative thinking. But he is wishing to know what your thoughts are on the possible limitations of creative thinking, on the limitations on thinking such as the techniques of lateral thinking. Do you see any limitations? What would they be?
Well, any process has limitations. It's not infallible that once you try it, you're always going to get the best results you want. So, yes, but you can get many more alternatives and options than if you do not try it. Mm-hmm. So it gives you a better choice of things to choose from, if you want to. But if you're so convinced that your thinking is the best possible and you're not interested in choices, then it's more difficult.
Thank you. The young lady, I've seen you, te he visto, ahora venimos. Ahora primero la señorita.
Voy a preguntar primero.
First, I would like to ask, would you be kind enough to answer about Greece and the European Union?
Like what?
Before she asks the question, she'd like to know if you'd like to answer it. If you'd like to answer the question, because it's a question she'd like to put on you about Greece and the European Union. Can she put that question to you?
She can, but...
You can. You can.
We'll see.
And he'll answer if he can.
Como sabemos,
Well, as we all know, on Sunday, Greek population have to vote and see if they accept the conditions coming from the Troika, from Europe, or not. So, a Greek citizen, in this situation, with this referendum, what should he be thinking? Let's put it this way. If Malta was in a similar situation, you as a Maltese citizen, how would you tackle this situation? Maybe through a revolution.
Sunday,
yes,
with regards to whether they're going to accept or not the Troika's proposals. What would your recommendations be? What would the key be in terms of the thinking of the voters so that they can find a way out of the situation? What would we have done in Malta, she says?
Well, the voters are being asked whether to accept certain changes in governments and so on, which make it more likely that people who are owed money will get their money back. So you can think that, or you can say, we don't care. Those who lent us money, they've lost it. In the future, people may not lend us so much money. Yes, you can have a choice. There's two possible directions in which to go.
And what kind of thinking could they use to be able to find a solution?
Looking ahead into the future, what would be the result of either choice?
Perhaps, using consequence and sequel as a tool. Tenemos unos acrónimos que empleamos mucho.
We have acronyms that we use to try and focus on the future.
Term. Because we're not thinking too long term. It's very hard for us to think long term. And there's a tool called C&S, consequence and sequel, which allows you to have different kind of scenarios. If you go this way, what could happen? If you go this way, what could happen? And that will help you make a better decision. There was somebody else here, just a second. Would you mind? Well, have you finished with that? Sí. Would you recommend that they go to vote separating their emotions from their decision?
No, I don't think you should separate the emotions because this is an emotional matter and so on. I think you should say, what position would Greece be in if there's a yes or there's a no? And then you choose on that result.
So to have a better idea of the consequence and sequel, not to allow yourself to be only ambushed by the emotional moment. Sometimes we allow ourselves to be ambushed by the emotional moment.
And discuss it with your friends, see what they feel, and so on.
Thank you. Questions? There was somebody here? And there was a gentleman here who? Se ha ido. Sí. Sí, Ruth. Hemos ido cerrando. Ruth. We'll take Ruth's question, one more question, and then we need to start closing, but we're going to be available for you for a few minutes afterwards. Yes.
I'm too nervous to speak in English, or I'll do it in Spanish.
Okay.
Me llamo Ruth.
My name is Ruth. I am a doctor, a physician, I am a music student, and I am a mother. More than a question, I would like to share a reflection with you. As I have always said, there was a moment before and after I got to know your methodology. It has been a tipping point for me. And, it is so important what I have learned through you that, that it is so emotional how I feel. And every day I try and imagine if what people says in quantum physics, whether there are many different parallel realities. Do you think if in a parallel reality, the lateral thinking that my 10-year-old kid has still intact, do you think that maybe in one of those parallel realities that is feasible? Lateral thinking, the lateral thinking that we have as children, does it still exist when we become adults? And please say yes. parallel universes? Is that what you mean?
About you, which I'll have to explain afterwards because we're short of time, that your methodology has changed her life. But she'd like to know if you believe that there are parallel universes where creative thinking is also possible in this parallel universe.
Do I think the parallel universe creative thinking would also be possible? No, I don't think so, because most systems would not be designed to allow creative thinking.
So he thinks that in the parallel universe it may not be possible because systems are not designed to be creative. But when we get there, we'll find out truth, yes? When we get there, we'll find out.
We have to disrupt the way the system is designed in order to be creative. So the brain forms patterns. We have to disrupt those patterns to form new ones. So it'd be very difficult to have a biological system which was designed to be creative from the beginning. It's very difficult.
Did I have one last question? Would you like to ask a question? No? No questions? Any last questions? ¿Sí? ¿Sí? Sobre todo porque hay gente que espera para entrar.
Yes, because there are people waiting outside. Yes, two very short questions. I don't know if the answer will be short or not. What relationship do you establish between the development of thinking and the psychological needs? And the second, communicative interaction and thinking. Language proposed as a dialogue, as interaction.
You make between the malaise of emotional malaise, which could be like depression or not feeling very good about yourself, and thinking. What's the relation between those two?
Yes, normally if you don't feel good or you feel depressed and so on, you find thinking more difficult, yes.
And also that because creative thinking pushes up your endorphins, doesn't it?
Putting what?
Your creative thinking pushes up your endorphins.
Yes.
So with the practice of creative thinking, you become a lot more optimistic. And therefore, you reduce that malaise that you may have. And on the other hand, the question was, how do intercommunicative skills, yes, relate to thinking skills?
Yes, and you could say to yourself, now, if I wasn't depressed, what would I think about this?
Okay, but in terms of intercommunicative skills and thinking skills, what would the relationship be?
Well, the thinking skills would be much more limited, yes, in depression.
Okay, but that was the second question. Anyway, we'll answer you outside, perhaps, to go into it deeper, because it's a bit of a longer question. Any other questions? Any other questions down there? No? Herman, no questions? Sorry? Yes, it's true. Okay. Okay. Well, ¿tenías una más? What is the test for your socks?
What?
What is the test for your socks?
The test for your socks, that you look down, you notice the socks, and you comment on the socks.
Por tanto, a partir de ahora, por favor, fijaros en...
So from now on, please take a look at his socks. He has just given a new pair of socks, and he will be wearing them.